Today is Monday, November the 14th, 2011. This is the start of an interview with Mr. Samuel Laswell at the RSVP offices of Catholic Services in Macomb, located at 26238 Ryan Road, Warren, Michigan. Mr. Laswell is 79.
Oh, I'm not going to thank you for that. 69.
Excuse me?
I'm 69.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Giving away too many years all at once here. I don't give away
I
any
did
years.
this late last night and I guess I missed.
Yeah, I was born in 42, so 69.
That's
just
correct.
had 69th birthday.
Your date of birth is August the 31st, 1942.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Laswell currently resides at 9158 Seminole Street in Redford, Michigan. My name is Dave Brousseau and I'll be the interviewer, and Gary Migley will be the videographer. Mr. Laswell, would you state for the record the branch of service that you served?
I was in the United States Air Force from 1966 to 1970.
All right, let's go back to high school, or let's look at your family at that time.
Okay.
How big was your family?
Well, I had a brother and a sister. My brother was born in 1947, and my sister was born in 1956. She was a bit of a surprise, you might say. So she was really kind of like, had different parents than I did. You know, the generational gap there was significant.
I'm sort of interested in your high school days. As you finished your high school, where did you go to high school?
I went to Detroit Redford, and that was located at 6 Mile and Grand River Avenue.
Okay. Did you enlist or were you drafted?
Well, when I wrote my comments, I said both, because
yeah, I thought that was interesting.
well, when my wife and I got married on July 8, 1966, and it was 7 days exactly, a letter came in the mail from my draft board in Detroit. It said, "Greetings." And so I was in the middle. I was both married and I was a student in good standing at Western Michigan University, and at that time, as I recall, the law stipulated that college students in good standing or people who were married were exempt from draft. There might have been some changes going on at that point, but I still got a draft notice, and I went to over to Detroit from Kalamazoo and had an appointment with my draft board to appeal. When I got there, I was denied an appeal, and I asked if I could at least finish the semester, because the date for my reporting was 2 weeks prior to the end of the summer semester, which meant I would have to give away all of that tuition and classwork accomplishment. And my draft board, it was a woman, she was in charge. I don't know what her title was at that time, but she said, "No, we're not going to give you a single day. You have to report on the day we specified." And I was kind of upset with her, so I told her, well, I wasn't going to report. And she said, well, if you don't, we'll send U.S. Marshal after you. And I said, no, you're not going to do that either. Because I knew more than I was telling her, and she probably picked up on that too. But I abruptly left office, and I said, I'm going to finish my semester whether you like it or not. I walked out and went back to Kalamazoo, sat down and wrote her a letter saying that because I lived beyond, I think it was 60-mile limit, that I couldn't report to Detroit for induction, and that she should transfer my draft board to Kalamazoo.
What made you enlist?
Well, we didn't, talk with my wife, and she said, together we decided we didn't either one want the combat option. If I got drafted, the vast majority of people at that time were going into either Marines or Army, and a lot of them were headed to Vietnam. And so we decided to look at the other options. Navy was a possibility, but still separation would have been long periods of separation. Coast Guard didn't seem too attractive, so I visited the Air Force recruiter in Kalamazoo and asked him what my options were there, and he said, well, I don't know if he was pulling my leg or what, but he said he had one slot open for Michigan, and asked me if I wanted it. And I said yes. And so I enlisted because my induction had been deferred through the draft. That was now canceled or postponed.
How much college did you have at this point?
I had about 3.5 years. So I was a junior.
Kind of surprised that they wouldn't have
Well,
wanted to use that. It depends at the time what they need.
right, yeah. Well, I lived in...
And you're expensive because you're married and, you know, that...
Right. I lived in Grandmont subdivision, which was just south of Rosedale Park. And the reason the supervisor at the draft board told me she wasn't going to give me any time or wasn't going to give me an appeal was because 95%, according to her, of the young people coming out of those residential areas went to college. So they ignored all the federal legislation regarding marriage and college status and drafted everybody anyway. So I guess they got away with it. But that was...
Until you argued with them.
Well, I knew the law, and I knew I didn't have to report to Detroit. All I had to do was write a letter. And but I knew it was kind of inevitable I was going to get drafted anyway. That's why I went to the Air Force, and I ended up serving 4 years instead of 2. And you're right, it was more expensive because they not only sent me to Alaska and paid me overseas pay. Army didn't get overseas pay in Alaska, by the way, but Air Force did. And they also paid separate rations for my wife, which was a nice amount of money for that time and for our situation. I can remember one day when we were in technical school in Rantoul, or maybe it was in, I can't remember when we bought the hair clippers, but it was Rantoul, Illinois. It was either buy the clippers or eat. I mean, we had to go shopping and we couldn't afford to do both. But I was under orders to get a haircut by the next day.
And at the time you were sent to Alaska, it was now a state.
It was a state.
That's why you didn't get special pay.
Well, I did get overseas pay there.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Alaska was a state, was it 59?
Yeah.
They were a state, and we actually drove up there in February in 1967.
Where?
From here
Yeah.
To Alaska. It took us 13
Where
days.
in Alaska?
Anchorage.
Were they over the big earthquake?
That was just a few,
66.
yeah, that was just a couple years before, 64 was the big earthquake. And while most of the structural damage to buildings at that time had been taken care of, there was still a lot of evidence of the recent earthquake there. There was a park that was kind of set aside to kind of protect and preserve some of the effects, and that was still there.
When you got in the Air Force, what was your designation going to be? I mean, how did you figure out what you wanted to do, and how did you figure out what they wanted you to do?
Well, when we went through basic, we did go through some aptitude testing. I'm not sure how relevant that was in our assignments, because we had some guys in our units that were clearly more capable than others. But military in its wisdom assigns people to certain MOSs, and I got 43131, I think it was, which was for jet aircraft over 2 engines, which is cargo aircraft and B-52s were mainly it at that time. I think there's 1 or 2 other planes, but they were rather small numbers. But so I was actually trained in Chinook on B-52s, but never worked on them in the field. I worked on 141s and C-130s.
Now, when you came in, you had an extended period of boot.
Actually, it was not a long time
Really?
boot. It was. I went in August 23rd, I think it was, 1966, and so basically had September and part of October, and I was on my way to maybe 6 weeks, 7 at the most, and I was on my way to Chinook for technical training.
What was the boot like?
The hardest part about boot was the fact that I had been married just a few days few weeks and leaving my wife behind. That was really hard to do. And that was a stress all the way through boot camp because,
particularly if it's the first time you've left.
Right. It was the first time I ever left family for any period of time. We moved a couple of times, and those were other stories. But when I went to boot camp, that was a tough thing to leave my wife behind.
And that is a long way away.
Yeah, a couple thousand miles, and it's made longer by the fact that you're absolutely confined to this piece of land. You can't go outside of its boundaries because you're under military control at that time. And I was I wasn't the only married person in boot camp, but I was one of few. And I think that played a role in some of my relationships in boot camp. Some of the guys, I got a lot more letters than a lot of guys did, and I think they were jealous of that.
I'm sure.
And but if we did get a care package, I think we tended to share those among the people in our area. We were in a 2-story barracks, so I don't know who was on the other floor. I was on the ground level, and so if I got a care package or somebody else did, we shared it as we were able to. Everybody got a cookie or as much as could go around or whatever. And they came fairly regularly because other guys had parents or whatever who were kind of sending them these little packages of grace, and they were very well anticipated and hoped for.
Mm-hmm.
But the letters were the main thing, and I think my wife and I were sending back and forth letters, and if not daily, very, very frequently.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Any experiences in boot that you recall that are worth noting?
Well, one of the things we used to do, especially as we were given a little more freedom, we used to go out and hunt for 90-day winters. It was, you didn't have a lot of recreation on boot camp, but we figured out that if we walked to a certain direction, we tended to get over where officer training was. And you should know 90-day winters were those who went through 90-day officer training school or some short period of time. And so we would go over there and just to force them to salute us. We'd go by and we'd have to salute every officer, right? So we'd go over there and salute, and they got tired of doing that. And so they would duck around the corner of a building when they saw us coming. Well, we knew where they were going, so we'd go the other way and catch them coming down the other side of the building. And you could see the frustration on their faces as they had to return that salute. So, but that was only on the weekend.
What we do on our time off. We'll run around trying to get officers to salute us.
Well, that was compared to my last day when I got discharged. I was down in Norton at that time, and I walked out of the building. I took my cap off. I walked past a 1-star general. I said hello, and I didn't even say sir. I didn't salute him, and I walked right off the base. So, I mean, I was done. When I signed that last paper, I figured I was out. I didn't have to salute anybody anymore.
So after boot, where was your first assignment?
A bunch of us got assigned to Rantoul, Chanute Air Force Base, Rantoul, Illinois, and we all went to Jet Engine over 2 school. And there were 3 or 4 of us, and we stayed together. We went from boot camp to technical school to Elmendorf in Alaska, and then to Norton. All 4 of us stayed together through that whole period of time. And all 4 of us stayed on the same work team all the way through.
Now, your next assignment, was that when your wife was allowed to?
Well, actually, she
come
came.
With you?
She was able to come down to Chanute, and so I got there, and part of the introduction to the base was, we were told that we could bring our wives if we were married, and I immediately went over to the day room and asked for permission to bring my wife down, and by the next weekend she was down there with me. And so actually the next weekend I got a pass to go up back into Michigan and meet her, and we drove down there. And so I left Saturday morning, met her in South Haven, Michigan, and we stayed overnight with her sister who lives there, and then drove back Sunday and moved into our apartment Sunday evening. And so I spent less than a week on base in a barracks at Chanute. And as I said in my notes, the barracks at Lackland Air Force Base, where I went through basic, was a palace compared to this one at Chanute. Boy, this was kind of rickety old and just not very comfortable. And I was very glad to get off base.
Your wife joined you where?
At Chanute.
At Chanute?
Yeah.
What did you think about that, wife?
That was good. I had resigned earlier from teaching when we were getting married, but at that time they needed teachers so badly they had me come back for the month and a half. So I had to leave that position. And then also in Illinois, we had an upstairs apartment and we had 1 month left in this short time. We moved from upstairs apartment to downstairs apartment to save $5 for that month. I remember waiting for payday to buy bread and milk.
Yeah.
Was that change significant for you to?
It was. I was raised on a farm on the Lake Michigan side of the state, and had always lived in the same area except going to college.
And abundance was a part of living on a farm. We were always, we were having to scrimp and scrape. How are we going to eat? Buy hair clippers or buy food kind of thing. And so the military pay had us on a pretty tight budget, but we made it through. And I can say that we were better off for having gone through that time.
Okay, after this, then where do you head?
Well, I ought to tell you that when I was at Chanute, I got the measles. And prior to that, we had this opportunity to volunteer because there was a big buildup in a military support squadrons, or airlift support squadrons in both Anchorage, Alaska, and Elmendorf, and at Tachikawa, I think, Air Force Base in Tokyo, Japan. So we had, and there were 2 classes that at tech school that were being able to provided this opportunity to volunteer. There was one that was soon to graduate, and we were right behind them. And I figured, well, all these guys in that class up there, they're going to volunteer for Japan. I just know it. And I want to go to one of these 2 places. And so we were all going to be judged on our first choice first, and then if that was possible, we'd go through second choices. So I said, I want to go to Alaska. And I'd always wanted to go there anyway. It'd been kind of like a childhood dream to go there. And so we really loved Alaska. We did get that opportunity, but we're getting toward the end of tech school, and we came home from church one day, and we got locked out of our apartment, and we had to get a policeman to help us break in. And when I got in, I started getting undressed, and Judy says, "What's all that rash all over you?" And I hadn't started to feel the effects of it yet, but by that evening I was a pretty sick dude, and went to the hospital, and some second lieutenant doctor says, "Oh, you don't have any problem." And I said, "Well, you think you're going to send me back to my unit?" And he said, "Yep, you don't have any measles." And I said, "Well, I'm sicker than a dog, what do you think?" And he says, "Well, I'm going to send you back." And I said, "Okay, I'm going to go back to my unit, and I'm going to spread measles all over. What are they going to tell you after that?" And he says, "Well, maybe I'll give you up." So I got this sheet saying that I was excused from duty. I took it back to our day room, which they promptly misfiled it. And I'm home for a couple of days trying to recuperate. And our first sergeant called and asked where I was, and he said, "I'm listed as AWOL." And I said, "Well, we took this medical report over there to him." And he says, "It's got to be over there somewhere." And well, they did find it. And I finally got healed up, and I cleared to go back after maybe 3 or 4 days or whatever it was. And I reported into school, and they said, "Well, we got a problem. You're supposed to go to Alaska, but if you're absent more than so many days, we have to put you back into the next class, which means you're going to lose your status going to Alaska." But they said, and then they looked at my record, and I had a 98% achievement rate going through tech school up to that point. I was the highest achieving airman in school at that time, and they said, "Maybe we can do something about that. You're doing so well, we hate to put you back." they finally allowed me to continue on with my class. I did have a negative impact there. I graduated a 96%. So it wasn't that big a deal. But I graduated with honors, and whatever honors that means in that situation, and stayed with my class and my buddies, and we went up to Elmendorf. So we got word that that's where we were headed, and we'd been granted our choice when we volunteered for that. And when my last day came at Chanute, my wife and I headed up to Detroit and visited my folks for a few days. That was our plan. And then we were going to go over to New Era, which is north of Muskegon, and visit her parents, load up our household goods, and head off for Alaska. We'd gotten permission to drive up. I had to have permission from the base commander at Elmendorf to bring my wife. He gave that. And all that we would need is to find a place to live when we got up there. And so we went to Detroit, and this was late January, I think, and my wife and I decided to spend the day together. We went down to the Detroit Institute of Arts, and we were kind of touring the place, and when we left it was snowing pretty heavy. And so we drove home, didn't think much about the snow because it always snows in Michigan, and we drove home, and the next morning we had 3 feet of snow. And the roads were blocked, and I'm starting to wonder, oh my, how are we going to get to Muskegon, because I have to go. And so I said, wait a couple days, and we'll see how the roads become. So after a couple days, we didn't find any relief in sight. So I called the state police and asked them, how do we get to Muskegon? I'm under military orders. We have to go over there and head on our way to our next base. And the man I talked to, the officer I talked to, said, well, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but they just finished clearing one lane on I-96 all the way over to Muskegon. But be aware that you can't get off anywhere. There's only a few places where you'll be able to get off the road. Make sure your tank is full, take extra blankets and protection in case you get stranded. So we drove over there, and we drove one-lane highway all the way across the state, and he was right. We could only get off at places like Lansing and at Grand Rapids, because all the rest of the exits were still closed. And so we managed to get over there, weaving in and out of trucks and buses and cars, because they hadn't cleared the expressway. It was not open to general traffic. We were really not supposed to be out there. So we drove over there. As soon as we got into Muskegon, there was no more snow. And so we had no trouble getting north to her folks and heading on up.
Let me take you back a little bit. This is a pretty critical period in Vietnam War.
Yeah, it's the big buildup. Johnson's really building it up pretty big.
And a lot of negativity floating around.
Mm-hmm. Kent State.
How did you and your wife handle that or adapt to it? And how did your folks feel about that?
Well, I don't think our folks wanted to see us go into the military. But in some respect, it's kind of a big adventure to us. We're going someplace that I had at least really wanted to go all my life. I was not taking it too well that I had been kind of forced into the military, because I had 2 laws that said I should not have to go, but I was drafted. So that really kind of got on my mind a little bit. But since I made it through boot camp, I made it through tech school, my wife and I were together, we're on our way on this big adventure of our life, probably the biggest thing we ever did, to drive to Alaska in the middle of winter. And when you get in Canada, it's really winter. And so I think we accepted that. And we kind of were anticipating what was going to happen on this drive north.
I've said though many times, it was probably a lot harder for our parents knowing we were driving to Alaska from Detroit to, Alaska.
Right.
Well, they're probably not as well aware of what's happening, but they read the papers daily.
Right.
And Vietnam was not pretty. And if I had kids, I don't care what they thought, that's not where I'd like to see my kids fooling around.
Right.
So it must have been pretty devastating for them to...
Yeah, I think they were aware of what was going on, but I think they were relieved that we were not going there.
They were very supportive.
Yeah, we had good parents.
And one nice thing, when we were in Alaska, we had 12 people from Michigan visit us, which was wonderful because we were a long ways from home.
We had good connections with home.
Good, good.
Yeah, so as we were going along, it was we had to deal with a cold, and that was the hardest part about the drive. The coldest day and the most trouble we had was in Regina, Saskatchewan, when our car froze up, and it was Saturday night. And our Sunday morning we got up, couldn't get the car started, and in Canada at that time nobody is open to help you, so you just kind of sit out the day until Monday. They had blue laws and that, so nobody worked on Sunday except for emergency services. So we had to sit in a motel in Regina, Saskatchewan, and wait for Monday so we could get a tow truck to help us. And he came and pulled us to a Sears store, and it took 2 blocks of towing before our wheels started to turn on our car.
Well, and tell about plugging in the car.
Oh yeah, well I did anticipate that, and I bought an engine block heater so I could plug it into the. Well, it drew too much current, and it kept blowing the fuses in the motel. That's why we couldn't get the car started. So I was never able to use that block heater in the whole trip. And I kind of goofed up not buying another one, and at least getting something that would help. But I just made a bad decision here. But what I did to help us get through that whole trip across Canada, after that, every night, we parked the car, I went out, opened the hood, loosened up all this. I had an extra set of spark plugs along. I loosened up all the spark plugs, and then I took the battery in the motel room where it would stay warm. And I never had. So in the morning, I'd take the battery out, put it in, put the cables on, put in another set of warm spark plugs, put the spark plug cables on, and never failed to start. Even I think we got down to 60 below up in the Yukon, and it never failed to start. I tell you, it was cold. It was so cold I had to add oil to the engine one day, and I got the can that I brought along, and I opened it, and nothing came out. It was just a solid block.
Really solid.
Yeah. So I had to take it I took it in a restaurant, and I asked the waitress if she could put it in a pan of hot water so I could pour it in my engine. And so I got the oil out of the can. But it was really cold up along there. But we enjoyed the trip for the most part. I don't think the car ever really got warm on the whole trip, but we enjoyed it.
We drove according to the milepost book. It would tell you where there's a place to stay.
Yeah, once you got up to the beginning of the Alcan Highway, there was a book called The Milepost, and it told you where every service was, every motel, every gas station, how far it was, literally by mileposts. And so the longest stretch we had was about 200 miles where there were no gasoline stations. So we knew that in advance. So we made sure we had a full tank, and we used a lot of anti-ice stuff in the gas tank, and we made it all the way through.
One place we stayed, they had a bucket next to the bed because the roof was leaking all night.
Yeah, and there was we got up into Yukon or somewhere up in there, and there was a hallway outside our room, and there was a window that opened into our room. And after an Eskimo woman came up and opened the window and smiled at us, and I remember she didn't have any teeth. I said, well, we're not going to stay here tonight. That was the only time we drove at night. We never drove at night. That's one of the reasons why it took us so long, because if you went off the road there at night, it's all over. Mm-hmm. So you couldn't get help, and nobody was on the road at night, so not even the trucks. Mm-hmm. And so we parked when the trucks parked, and when you got up into that area, travel time was kind of short. So anyway, we're at Elmendorf now.
Okay.
And, that's at that time they were running 4 shifts of airmen around the clock, every day. So we had a rather nice schedule. We worked a 3-day shift on and 3 days off, and we worked 1 month on the day shift and 1 month on the night shift, 12-hour shifts.
Was there some specific project you were working on?
We were assigned to the 602nd Military Airlift Support Squadron. The headquarters were at McCord Air Force Base, and that was the 62nd Military Airlift Wing, I think. And
where was that?
That was McCord Air Force Base, Washington. And Washington State, yes. So we were up there as a assigned squadron from there. Never visited my home base, but we were up there, as a part of, I think it was Operation Fast Fly, and that was a airlift command operation to get men and materials to Southeast Asia as fast as possible. And from Dover,
that's a normal trip, going from the Midwest to go to.
right, it's a great circle route, and that's the shortest trip to go from like Charleston and Dover to go to Anchorage and then to Japan and then Southeast Asia. That's the shortest distance.
It's hard to see that until you look at a globe.
Right.
And you see that that stop at Anchorage is a much more effective and.
It was a couple thousand miles shorter than going through Hawaii.
Yeah. So you're going out of living to nobody lives here to back into the China and Japan and.
Well, actually, Anchorage was a very modern city. They had, you know, any convenience you would want. It just happened to be a long way from a lot of things.
With mountains all around you.
It was a very picturesque area.
It's gorgeous.
I imagine living in Idaho would be a lot like living there.
Really?
Yeah, well, a lot of mountains all around.
Yeah.
We were right at the foot of the Chugach Mountains, right outside of Anchorage, and it was just a beautiful, beautiful place to live.
In December, the sun set at 2:30, but sunset lasted about an hour, and it was a beautiful pink and blue on the mountains. It was really.
And when that sun hits the glaciers, you get that blue hue coming out of the ice. It is just so pretty.
Yeah, we couldn't have had a better assignment in the midst of a pretty stressful time for our country.
Yeah.
But yeah, we enjoyed that thoroughly. I was on Elmendorf Air Force Base. We're right next to Fort Richardson Army Base, and we had 2 post exchanges, 2 base exchanges, 2 PXs, 2 commissaries, 2 places where we could buy gasoline. And we didn't buy gasoline on the economy. We bought gasoline for about half of what people in town would buy it for. So we were able to live pretty comfortably up there, and food was inexpensive, and we had a lot of access to even some local crops. I remember we bought a cabbage. It was about this big. It was we had to cut it in like 4 pieces just to get it in the refrigerator. But you have to realize in Anchorage the sun's up for so long. They have farmers up there that grow cabbages, 1 cabbage to fill a wheelbarrow. And so they grow these just their normal size for them. I mean, 80, 90-pound cabbages. So it was. We had a good time up there. We really did. And
so your job was really servicing and maintaining
aircraft.
Right.
My first day on duty, I'm out there with a team. Elmendorf Air Force Base has the typical runways. It can handle any airplane. The long runway was about 2 miles long, and so it could handle anything that would come in there. And because of weather, sometimes we even got flights that were diverted from Anchorage International. And because they couldn't land over there because of fog or whatever, they'd come over to Elmendorf, or we'd go over there because of fog and catch planes over there. But so we went back and forth. But anyway, we had the layout on Elmendorf was you had 2 runways crossing, and all around, scattered around, are what are called hard stands, where you could park planes up and down the runways. And so we'd get assigned to hard stand. We'd go there, wait, plane would come in, and we'd service it, and it'd take off after a while. So we did that on a regular basis throughout the time up there.
Anchorage has a major radar installation facility up there.
Well, they're all over Alaska. There's some remote
There's
places.
the one major one that hooks up with 2 others across the globe, and it allows them to maintain this security blanket over the entire globe. This was something went back to
yeah, there's
Korea.
There's a bunch, and probably lesser ones across Canada, that the United States and Canadian government maintains watch on Russia and other countries across the pole.
You don't hear much about it, but if you're there for an extended period, you begin to find out about it. And
well, Judy
it's
had
kind of amazing.
Judy had a teacher friend whose husband was stationed at one of those remote radar sites, and he would only come home once a month and be with his wife. But she was up there in Alaska teaching, and he was up there, so he'd come in for a few days, about once a month. And it was Bonnie and Bob, I think. And So he was in the Air Force, but he was at this remote radar site. He was a radar electrician.
Did you get a chance to see any of Alaska while you were there?
We did. We, Judy, as I said, taught at one of the local schools, and she had some teacher friends who wanted to take a plane trip up to Nome and Kotzebue, which are up over Russia way. They're on the Bering Strait and Bering Sea, and so we decided we would go.
Western side of
On
Alaska.
the very western part of Alaska, right. Kotzebue is above the Arctic Circle, so we got above the Arctic Circle, and we were very interesting trip to see how Nome was a big gold rush town back in the day, and there were still some of the gold dredges that still existed up there, kind of historic artifacts.
Did you get to Nome?
We got to Nome.
Did you get to the North Pole?
No, I never got to the North Pole.
There's a city called the North Pole.
Oh yeah, right. That's north.
So funny.
That's up north of Fairbanks a little bit.
Yeah.
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 We didn't get there. But it's interesting that the Elmendorf home squadrons, that there were some C-123 squadrons there, and they would service bases in Greenland. So they were the main supply depot taking material to Greenland, which seemed kind of interesting.
Because Sam was working 3 days on, 3 days off. In the summer, it was daylight at midnight in June. We used our tent a lot and traveled around
But that's
Alaska.
beautiful in the summer,
Right.
you know.
We used to go
Right.
fishing and whatever.
I noticed when you were telling us you took a trip, you flew, because that's the only way you can travel in Alaska,
Yeah.
really. I don't remember the time that it changed. I was there in the 80s. There's one paved road going from Anchorage all the way to Fairbanks.
Yeah, well,
One
there's two.
two-lane highway, that's
Yeah,
it.
And
right.
one
There's
thing
two
I'm-
now, but they've got another one that's.
And I think back then that might even been a dirt road.
Well, it's possible, because a lot of the roads were dirt. They didn't blacktop them because they had frost would heave them up and they'd be terrible to drive on.
One thing about Fairbanks, it is much more extreme in temperature, really hot in the summer, cold in the winter. Anchorage is more moderate.
Yeah.
Anchorage is more like Traverse City, actually, in Michigan, as far as its climate. So it did get down to
20
well below zero a couple times every winter, but
They have
not
thousands of lakes, and it's strange to look at the lake because you're expecting boats. There aren't any boats, they're all airplanes, because that's the only way you get around.
Well, there's Merrill Field that's in Anchorage, and Merrill Field and Lake Hood, I think it was, are part of the same authority, so to speak. And between the two, at that time, Merrill Field and Lake Hood were the same, like I say, the same airport authority. That was the busiest airport in the world at that time, is when you count takeoffs and landings. And they're all the little 1 and 2 engine planes, you know, Piper Cubs, Cessnas, whatever, float planes going somewhere. And they had so many takeoff and landings that they were busier than any major airport in the United States or anywhere else.
Well, a lot of these planes are bush planes.
Yeah,
and,
right. So, but that's the only way I have to go. And when we went up to Nome, we went in a C-47, which is a 2-engine Goonie Bird. It took us 8 hours almost to get up there from Anchorage. We were only, a couple 100 miles an hour, or whatever the top speed of it was, and we took us better part of a day just to get up to Nome. So, but it was flying
Was
over.
it comfortable to be in a C-47, or did they have it outfitted?
Short term, so it didn't matter.
Well,
Yeah.
it was outfitted for comfort as much as they could make it, and I think we were, at least I remember being so engrossed with looking at what's happening outside, the terrain we're going over. I says, boy, I sure hope we don't go down there. They'll never find us, man. It was desolate.
Yeah, there's the Denali Park that separates Fairbanks from
Right, yeah.
Anchorage, and it's a couple of 50 million acre expanse for anything that lives to wander. And
Well,
We visited, at that time it was called McKinley Park. We
Oh.
visited there in August before we left and set up our tent, and it was so cold we slept in our car, and the next morning Sam says, let's make breakfast. So I opened the window and put my hand out, and a snowflake came down.
Well, we had seen a lot more snow when we going through a mountain pass approaching McKinley. I can't remember if it was going or leaving, but we got into a pretty good snowstorm, one way or the other. And it was so cold, we had this little gas stove. It wouldn't work. The flame wouldn't get hot enough to fry an egg.
Was your intention still at this point to get in and get the heck out?
Yeah,
I mean, were you learning anything, or were the trips you took worthwhile, or?
Oh, we enjoyed this.
Seemed to be
Being in
very
the military, compared to what my brother went through, he was in Vietnam, and he was a door gunner in a Huey, and he also served on artillery crew, and he saw all the body bags that were lined up and down the flight line after a combat mission and everything. And so I don't, you know, I would not say that I had anything nearly as hard as he had to go through, or any other combat soldier. So it's kind of like an extended vacation in many respects. We really enjoyed our time up there, and working on a flight line was oftentimes aggravating. I can remember working on one plane. We're having to change a flap actuator on a C-141, and it was raining. So where do you have to stand to change that thing? Right underneath the drip edge on the wing, and the water's just pouring off that wing on top of me and the other guy working on this flap actuator, trying to get it out and in. And by the time I got done, there's no part of me that's dry, and it's cold and miserable. And so I didn't even have enough time to go home and get a change of fatigues. And so I'm just having to go out there, and we got another plane shortly after that and worked on it in cold clothes. I mean, there was that kind of aggravation, but for the most part, the guys I worked with, we always did our absolute best to make sure that that plane got off the ground and had its best chance to get over and back or wherever it had to go. Our wing commander down in McCord Air Force Base would every now and then give what he called the Pride Award to those groups of men, those teams that did exceptionally well. And before I left there, my team was given a Pride Award, and I got a pin for it right here. And part of that was I was given a 7-day pass, and I could use it to get a hop on a C-141 over to Japan. So I was able to do that. And so an extra 7 days off. It wasn't leave, it was a pass, and the whole team was able to take it one person at a time, so we had to schedule it. But I got over to Japan.
So there was a sense of pride that you had in...
We did. You know, one of the things that we noticed rather quickly after we got up there was that these planes didn't carry just hardware; they carried soldiers, and we wanted to make sure we knew where they were going, and we wanted to make sure that it wasn't our fault if they didn't make it. We wanted to make sure that plane was airworthy, and we did our absolute best to make sure that plane was a safe ride for everybody.
You know, after just hearing you, I'm reminded of a couple other situations that we had a chance to interview people in Vietnam, particularly one not too long ago, whose job was to repair and replace pilot catapults of the pilot seat.
Yeah, right.
And he never saw any action, but he was so incensed and so into the job that every one of those pilots was his brother. And he wanted to make sure those people got the best they could. And if you want to say, all he did was make sure those ejection sheets worked.
Yep.
Because there's rockets attached to the bottom of them, and that's all between life or death in many cases when you need to eject.
And to do that job well, it's a very dangerous job. I remember we had a safety letter that came out from time to time, and they would cover all aircraft. The Air Force had a safety bulletin or paper or something, and on a B-52, some of those things took you out the bottom of the plane.
Yeah.
And there were instances where guys were careless with those and drilled holes in the floor of a hangar when they fired them off accidentally. So that, you know, they're very powerful, very dangerous, and to work on them took a person who really dedicated to the job of doing it right.
What struck me was that there were some conversations in the paper of people interviewed that sent in their notice about people who are not combat aren't really worth being vets and that kind of stuff, comparing them to the real vets who were in combat.
Well, we're a different level, that's true.
Well,
yeah.
but the people I have had the opportunity to talk with show much the same determination and the same kind of intensity that you would if you had been in combat and doing important jobs that...
Yeah, we're kind of behind the scenes, and we weren't ever mentioned in the news, but that I know of. But I gotta tell you for the record that, you know, when I got there in Elmendorf and I began to see soldiers going westward on those planes, they had, you know, I don't know if you ever saw a 141 outfitted for parachute jump, but they have 4 rows of canvas seats, very uncomfortable,
Yeah.
down the length of the plane. And so
Yeah.
you would, if you were going to jump from a parachute, I imagine there was a line up above you. You hook your parachute onto that and you walk out the back of the plane and jump off the back of the plane, because they had a ramp that would come down. There were 2 doors on each side you could go out. And so most of the time, that's the seating arrangement these guys had to sit in, all the way from wherever on the East Coast all the way to Southeast Asia. I can't imagine anything more uncomfortable. And to a man, I would say everybody in our squadron said, we're going to do our best to make sure those guys get over there and have the best opportunity to get back home to their families. We're not going to be the thing that stands in their way. And we did our job well. I'm proud to say I worked with those guys. And whether, you know, we were aircraft technicians general, and we're supposed to do some of the general stuff like when we were at Elmendorf, like refueling and doing minor inspections and minor repairs, but we did everything from replace wheels and brakes and tires to replace engines, and I even helped replace the horizontal stabilizer actuator, which is way up on the top of the T-tail, and it's dangerous to be up there. I even helped do that on one plane, and I've helped replace engines, I've replaced tires and brakes, and we even had a team replace a landing gear. So I mean, there's all kinds of work that we did. The only thing that our squadron did not do was the electronics avionics. There was a unit whose home station was Elmendorf who were equipped to do that for us. So, but we did the best we could, and we never had an aircraft incident, my time up in Elmendorf at least, where a plane had to return because of a maintenance issue. And so we did, and I never told my wife about this part of my service until fairly recently. I wrote an article for the Redford Observer newspaper telling about my experience at Elmendorf. And I never told her until she read that article, and she said, you never told me about that. And it didn't take long when I was up there, and we caught a plane, and I go on board to do something like check the hydraulic fluid levels, and it's full of caskets. It just stunned me, and to know that every one of those was somebody's lost dreams and hopes for the future. Somebody's son, some woman's husband, that's all that's left. And if I wasn't emphatic about doing a good job, when I saw them, I said, this plane's going to make it back to its home base if it's up to me. And we also had some planes where medevac flights where seriously wounded would be taken back to stateside hospitals, and there's not a man up there that would ever say that they didn't do their job with extra special attention on the days we serviced those planes, at least. I don't think those guys kind of were aware of us when they're coming and going on the medevac flights, but if there's any of them listening to this, I want them to know that we worked extra hard to make sure that plane was airworthy to get them back to their home base, wherever they were going. We were totally devoted to that. And I'm proud to say that.
Good, glad you did.
Yeah, 'cause, you know, we didn't want a plane to have a mechanical issue after it left Elmendorf going either way. And so we were very, very conscientious. That's
Tell
why I
us
got that
about-
pride award.
Tell us about your tit-to-tay with the Chinese.
Oh, well, there was a time, really never got into anything as the Chinese, there's a lot of negotiations throughout the Vietnam War with both the North Vietnamese and with the Chinese, because they had a lot of political influence and so forth. And they also supported North Vietnam's government, and militarily and everything. There were even Chinese advisors that came south into South Vietnam from time to time. And so there were a couple of Chinese battalions that all of a sudden went up along the North Korean border, which the U.S. government took that as a sign of hostility. And one way of responding to that was they made us ready to go to South Korea in case we had to go to support increased military activity over there. So part of that preparation meant we all had to go get a plague shot, and I hope you never had to have one of those. But that's the best way I can describe it is when we got these shots. We usually got our shots with pneumatic gun when we had to go through these, but we all got these with needles. And we went through this line, and we walked in one door, we got the shot, walked out the other door, and when we got through the other door, guys were keeling over for pain. It was like somebody was standing outside that door with a hatchet and taking a whack at your arm. It was that painful. And it was the only time we were allowed to march or walk back to our barracks at ease. And the whole time down it. And we, we were taken over as a unit to get this, and we were walked back, and we were marched over and walked back, and we were just groaning and moaning, and we had guys faint from the pain. That's how bad it was. I had no idea why it was painful, but it sure was. We had to have the shot in case we had to go to Korea. But that was the main thing. But we never went. China pulled their battalions back, and the tension eased a little bit.
You spoke of another negative experience when you discovered an aircraft cockpit that you've been working on.
Now that was when we went. I was down at Norton Air Force Base at that time. We were up in Alaska for 2.5 years, and we were able to leave during the summertime, and we took a path that took us down the west coast of Canada into Vancouver, and we drove to Michigan, camping all the way, and we drove out to California and ended up at Norton Air Force Base in San Bernardino, California. The base is no longer there. It's an international airport now. And I was made a team leader. I was given extra training when I was down there. I was able to run engines on C-141s. After maintenance, I would go up in the cockpit and run the engines. That was a kick. Fire up all 4 of those engines, and all I had to do was pop the brakes and we'd be off. But that was not a comforting thought, because I couldn't deal with that. But to have that power at your hand is just something. And so that was one of the things. But anyway, one of the days we came out we came on shift, and we had a kind of a van type truck that would carry guys around to different planes and drop them off. And we got dropped off at our plane. There was nobody there, and I'm not sure today what we were supposed to do there, but we were going to do something with it, and even if babysit it for a while. And a couple of guys went up on the plane, and I was team leader at that time, and so I stayed down out of the plane and talked to a couple other guys and to give them assignments, I guess, and tell them what to do. And all of a sudden, these other 2 guys come out of the cockpit, and he said, "You ought to see this cockpit. Somebody's bashed it all up." And man, red flags go up, and I hop up in the plane, and I go in there, and I look at the cockpit. A bunch of the gauges have been broken and damaged. And, quite a bit of damage done to inside of the instrument cluster on the cockpit. And I just turned around, I flew off that plane, and I grabbed my whistle and I started blowing it, trying to get attention of the crew truck that dropped us off. And eventually he saw me running toward him, and he came over, and I jumped on that truck and I said, "That plane been sabotaged." And it didn't take 5 minutes. There were about every piece of brass on that base were out there on that plane. And the two guys that went up in the plane initially were at first accused of committing the damage. But these two guys that went up there were two men that I had been all the way from boot camp with. They were two of the four I told you that we went all the way through that 4 years together. And I knew those guys. I said they would never do that. And so I stood up for them. I put my rank and my welfare on the line. And I was interviewed 3 or 4 times for that. And every time I was adamant. I said, "Sir, you have to go find someone else. We didn't do that. I know these guys. I trust them." I told them, I said, "I put my rank on the line. I'm that confident of that these guys didn't do it." And the officer says, "You are putting your rank on the line." So I was really serious. And but my insistence that my crew had not done this really made an impression on those officers who were investigating it, and they dug a little deeper and found out that a couple guys on the previous team had come on duty drunk and they kicked the dashboard in.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only time I knew of that any airman caused a problem with an airplane in my 4 years. So, and they didn't report it, and they were hoping that we'd get blamed for it. But they almost succeeded. But I have to say it's my insistence that they weren't looking in the right direction when they were looking at my team.
Amazing.
That made the difference. I got 2 guys out there I ought to be very grateful for the
Yeah.
backbone I had. Because I had to stand up to a general and tell him he was wrong. And to be able to do that was took a little bit of fortitude on my part.
Make sure you're right.
Well, I was absolutely convinced. I went and talked to my guys and I said, and I told them what kind of trouble we were in if we didn't, if they didn't find somebody else guilty. I said, we're all going to we're all going to get court-martialed, we're all going to lose our rank, we're all going to get booted out. I says, I need to know, did you do this or not? And they said no, and I believed them. And
what did they do to the guilty parties?
They were court-martialed, and I suppose discharged dishonorably, but yeah, it took them a little bit of time they went through repeated interrogations of my team and that other team, and finally the other team finally caved in and admitted that they did it.
What happened after Elmendorf?
Well, as I said, went down to Norton Air Force Base, and I was finally rotated out of there. Kind of hard not to have that overseas pay anymore, but we went down there. I was sergeant ranked by then E4, and I was given 1 stripe after at tech school, and I was given 2 stripes while I was at Elmendorf. I was on line for a 4th one at Norton, and I would have been given it automatically had I re-enlisted, but I had to take my chances about getting it. There was a possibility I could still get it without, but I never got it.
So what was your rank then?
Sergeant E4 when I was discharged. Yeah.
Weather's certainly much better down in Norton.
Well, it's different by any stretch of imagination. So we were down there for 9 months. I was released 3 months early for the convenience of the military, my paper says. I asked for the early release, which those things were being granted at that time. This was 1970, and the manpower requirements for the Air Force were decreasing at that time. Went in at the build-up, and it was getting out at the decrease, and so they were willing to let airmen go early if they had good reason. And I found out that I could return to college for a summer semester And then, this is how close I was to graduating when I went in. I had one summer semester and one full semester, and then I graduated. The Air Force said, well, we'll let you, if you let us pay for your rest of your tuition, you can be an officer. And I said, well, what do I have to do to get this privilege? You have to stay in 6 years. And I said, no, thank you.
That was my next question. Did you consider?
Not very long. They tried real hard to get me to go to OTS. And,
20 years sounded like a long time on that
it
side.
did. And to stay 6 years,
Well,
I
but
didn't
it's
like
20
that.
minus your time in.
Well, 20 years after would look a lot different.
Yeah.
But anyway, they sent me to language school. Or they sent me, while I was at Chanute, they sent me to take a language evaluation test to see if I would be good at a language. And the whole intention of this was to kind of persuade me that I ought to go to OTS. And so I sat there at the test and I went A, B, C, D, C, B, A, and I did all kinds of random answers up and down the test. I never answered a single question. I just was fed up with the process. So I didn't, and I got through the test, and I took my time doing this, so it was like a half hour. So, and I had every kind of conceivable pattern that you could put on a multiple choice test, going up and down and answering the questions. It was, somebody looked at that thing and said, well, this guy didn't answer it. They wouldn't even have to score it. Because I was not going to go to OTS. I wanted in and out in 4 years, and that's what we got. And did I make the right decision? Well, you can tell. But I think life has been good to us, basically, and I think that we didn't really make a bad decision not sticking with that. But
You spoke of some commendations. You want to give us kind of a rundown on those?
well, the two of the commendations I got were, well, good conduct medal, which is the one that really matters to me, because you had to kind of do your job well, and you could, if you had one disciplinary action, you couldn't get it. And so I made it through. I just missed a cluster on my good conduct medal because I didn't stay in that last few months. But I got the good conduct medal when I was at Elmendorf. I think you had to be in 2 years, and no disciplinary actions, and do your job well. So even if you didn't get a disciplinary action, you might not get it because, well, maybe a supervising NCO or whatever might say, this guy doesn't deserve it. He might be a little bit of a troublemaker, but not enough to get an Article 15 or whatever, So, or Section 8, I guess is what it is. But so anyway, I got that, and then everybody got the National Defense Service Medal because we were in during Vietnam era, so everybody got it. And I got a letter of commendation from base commander at Norton for my involvement in that aircraft incident. I've got that in my permanent file. I still have a copy of that someplace. I don't know where my records are. They're filed in a box in our basement. I have no idea. So that was probably one of the highlights of my short Air Force career, to get that letter. And he commended me on my perseverance on behalf of my team in that incident. And I said I had the Pride Award, which I get the pin right here. And somewhere I have a certificate. It's in my, like I say, it's in my record. It's buried in our basement somewhere. And if I had been able to find it, I could have brought you a copy. But getting that was an important event too, because not every one of the teams up at Elmendorf got the Pride Award, but ours did. A bunch of good guys.
So you get your early release. Now what do?
Well, I got that so I could go back to school, and so we took we had a child by then. Our son Tom was born while we were at Norton, and he was born at Loma Linda University Hospital, which is a Seventh-day Adventist hospital, a very modern, up-to-date, cutting-edge facility. And it's interesting that the Air Force paid all of our expenses for the birth of our son, except for separate rations, which is meals for my wife and for our son for 3 days. They charged me $25. So, and Tom was nursing, so I don't know where they got the $12.50 for him, but they charged me $12.50 for him too. So, so anyway, we were discharged. We had a great time being at Norton too. We were on a 4-day, 3-day off schedule, and so we were able to do a lot of different things down there. Like I say, in many ways it was an extended vacation. And when I was discharged, we drove home back to Michigan. We drove through a lot of national parks we had that were kind of along the way, like Bryce and Zion National Parks. And
set up the tent.
And we camped along the way to save money, and couldn't afford motels. And so we drove home. It's interesting. We camped one day after we crossed the Rocky Mountains just east of Denver, and we got on the freeway, I-70, and we're driving, or 80, whatever, and we're driving east, and we keep getting blown off the road by all these vehicles going much faster than we were, and we were going 70, and eventually we were doing 90, 95, and in 8 hours we made it all the way back to Illinois, 800 some miles.
Now, how are you going to finance your college?
GI Bill. We used it immediately, and that paid for the largest part of that. GI Bill back then was a little more generous than it is now. A lot more generous, as a matter of fact, and so it paid all of my tuition and books, and I think it may have even paid some of dormitory expenses.
Yeah, there's a stipend for living.
Yeah, so I think it paid some of that. I don't remember exactly, but that was very generous. And so we landed back in Kalamazoo after we got back to Michigan. We were in on-campus married housing, and we stayed in that apartment until I graduated the following December.
When you got back, how did your folks react to that?
Well, they were very glad to have us back home.
I'm sure.
Yeah. I think it's good to say that we both had good in-laws. A lot of in-law jokes out there, and but those don't apply to our experience.
That's good.
You know, Judy's parents were probably a big part of the reason why I married her. They were wonderful in-laws, and I think Judy would say the same on my side too.
That's nice.
Our parents really supported us. Parents never are perfect by any means in any stretch of imagination, but when we got back, they were so glad to see us. You know.
And in your case, you had a brother that was over there too.
Right, and when we were up in Elmendorf, it was really interesting. In April, we found out the date was someday in April of 1969. I left there in August of '69, so my brother was drafted the summer of 1967. He put in just short of 2 years in the Army. He was drafted, and he was sent to Southeast Asia. And as I said, I think earlier, he was a door gunner in Huey, and he was on an artillery team. He told my mom he was on a carpenter team. You know, he was building barracks. Glenn, how many barracks can you build in 2 years? But he did that to spare my mother. And
do you think we could interview him?
I don't think he wants to talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't want to talk about it to me. I don't think he talked to you. I told him about this, but he kind of passed it off.
It'll take some time. I have a brother, the same thing.
Yeah, right. So anyway, where were we?
Seems like he had a pretty interesting trip.
Yeah.
That'd be nice to listen
Well,
to.
anyway, we're sound asleep. It's nighttime, and the phone rings, and might have been Judy that answered the phone, because I'm slow waking up, but I'm not a night person by any means. But one of us answered the phone. Hello, does the Sergeant Laswell live there? Yes. Does he have a brother named Glenn? Yes. Well, Glenn's in an airplane. He's going to land at Anchorage International in a couple hours, and he wants to meet you. And he had gotten the pilot on the plane to call ahead and see if I could if I could get over to the airport. So he was on a commercial flight. He was not on an Air Force plane. So he was on like American Airlines or something, whatever it was. And so we got the call. We got dressed. We got over to the airport before the plane landed. So we were there when it landed. He came in and we were so glad to see him too. He's heading east and he's out. I mean, as soon as he gets back and signs the papers, because he was in Southeast Asia more than a certain amount of time, if you were there like a year and a day or a year and a week or something, whatever that time limit was, then they would discharge you immediately, even though you weren't in for a full 2 years. So he got out with 3 months of grace, and we got to see him on the way home. It was good to see him.
I'll be darned. So you finish college, and then what did you start doing?
Well, with all the returning GIs at that time, jobs were getting kind of hard to find some places. Well, we ended up going to a little town, South Haven, Michigan, where I got a job as an automotive technician. Not exactly what I was trained for, but it turned out to be a good move for me because it qualified me to return to college in 1974, again on the GI Bill, and to get my master's degree in vocational secondary education. And it sounds like I was headed for teaching auto mechanics in high school, but I ended up in a community college instead, and I taught at the community college level for 11 years before I ended up pursuing other things. At that time, we had a governor here in Michigan who didn't like post-secondary education at the community college level. He was kind of a fan of big universities, but didn't like I won't say his name, but he imposed some really big, serious budget cuts on community colleges. Michigan was going through some financial stress, but he took a lot of it out on that part of the budget. And so a lot of us at the college I was working at lost our jobs. We were in a small community college in Benton Harbor. 65 of us lost our jobs because of it. So I ended up teaching a few more years in Kalamazoo, and that was for the total of my 11 years. And after that, went back into the industry, but never found anything really very gratifying. My last job in that sector of the market was as a parts department manager in a dealership in South Haven. And that was really a pretty good job. A couple of supervisors I worked with were not all that great to work for, but that was a good job. And then in 1989, I was really getting a sense that I didn't belong there, but I belonged somewhere else. And I entered seminary and became a minister at that time.
You started on the day of our 25th wedding anniversary.
Yeah, that first day
with Greek.
First day of seminary was on our 25th anniversary. So we didn't get much of a celebration. But one interesting thing is, you asked me earlier about high school. When I went through graduation in high school, I didn't even have my cap and gown off, and I was telling everybody in earshot, I'm never going to school again as long as I live. Well, I have 4 college degrees now. So I have an associate degree, a bachelor's degree, and 2 master's degrees. So I was.
So what'd you do with the divinity degree?
Well, I preached in churches in New York, Illinois, and Michigan. I was a minister from 1975.
Not 75.
Or 1995 to 2006, and so another 11 years.
So would you just kind of rotate?
Yeah, I was.
And then you did some after that.
And then I retired in October 2006. I retired, but I became trained as what is known in the ministry as a specialized interim minister, and what that means is that I'm able to consult with churches that are going through transitional periods, and if they're and generally when a church loses a minister, it goes through some issues, and very often the next pastor in doesn't stay there more than a very short period of time.
Yeah.
And so to kind of help that process, help that church avoid that kind of a event. A person like myself would go in there and consult with them and help them research their past and look at their issues and what their goals for the future are, and to help them determine the kind of person
They're looking for.
style or personality, whatever they ought to look for. And with the hope that their next pastor would be a long-term successful ministry. And for the most part, the work we do, and there's a whole bunch of us that do this, has been very successful.
So you're still doing that?
I'm not doing that right at the moment. I don't have a contract because the opportunities are not very great here in this area, but I'm looking for one. Yeah. I did do that for a year and a half with an English-speaking Korean ministry up in Southfield, which was a very, very interesting experience.
Got 5, Dave. 5 minutes.
So when you look back, quite a career.
Life's been pretty good to us, I think. My wife and I are kind of sedentary people. We would like to stay in one place all the time, but God's had us moving around everywhere. And for our good, I think we've done a lot of interesting things, a lot of interesting experiences. And as we close, I just want to mention that my family has a military history. It goes all the way back to the Revolutionary War, so I'm very proud of our military. Had great-grandfather fight in the Confederate States side of the Civil War, and 5 or 6 uncles in World War II. One of them at the Battle of the Bulge. I've had 3 uncles in the Korean era. My brother and I were in Vietnam era. We have a son who joined the Marines, and he served during the Iraq era. I have a cousin who was in the Navy, so we've had family members in every branch except Coast Guard, and served in almost all the wars that our country has fought. Not World War I, no.
And you, Judy, being dragged all over the world.
It's been an adventure.
I can imagine. It takes a certain kind of person to be able to handle that.
Good thing I'm a middle child.
How big was your family?
I had a brother and a sister, or I still do.
Mm-hmm.
But this was a big change.
Yeah.
It's the military life isn't something we would have chosen, but it really enriched our lives. For one thing, we saw a lot of beautiful national parks just traveling from one base to another.
Yeah, we didn't, like I say, we didn't experience anything like what a combat soldier would experience. And I don't mean to say that we did at any point of the conversation, but I feel kind of sad that they had to go through what they went through.
Yeah.
Because just the things I saw, the dead and the wounded coming back, and the hardships they were going to be faced with and their families, and on our way over here, I was feeling kind of sad that to have all these memories kind of such that I have, very different than them. That's part of my memory bank, and so there's a couple movies I can't watch, and one of them's Platoon, and the other one's Saving Private Ryan. There's scenes in there I just can't take because I relate to them. I relate what's happening in that film to the caskets and the wounded I saw on those planes, and I can't take that.
There's a lot of vets. World War II, Korea, and
Yeah, I can watch some of them, but I can't watch those two in particular.
they can't do that.
Yeah.
Too many memories.
Right.
And they're ones they're trying to sit on and get rid of. And
I can't get rid of them. And that's why I'm here. I can't get rid of it, so I might as well share it to some extent. Maybe what I have to say will help somebody.
we've had a couple vets in here that have been shot down. One in World War II and one in Vietnam, and to listen to those stories are difficult for them to share, but really difficult to hear.
When we were in New York, met a guy who was a nose gunner in a B-24, and he made it through 25 missions. I have no idea how.
Yeah.
And he had wonderful stories to tell.
Percentages are not high.
No. So I welcome the opportunity. Whenever I see a man in uniform, I go up and try and go up and thank him for serving.
Good for you. Good for you.
And I know the sacrifice they're making.
How many children did you have?
2 sons.
2 sons.
Yeah. David stayed civilian all his life, but our son Tom surprised us by joining the Marines. He graduated from boot camp on the day the Allies invaded Kuwait. We were very concerned for him.
So now the boat turns
Yeah.
where now you're the parents and
Right.
it's, typically it's the woman who suffers the most in those
We suffer,
children leaving and worrying. We've had some,
we
really-
suffer differently, men and women.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it's not to exclude the fathers, but seems emotionally the mother seems to take the brunt of that at least, yeah. Well, thank you very much for sharing what you did with us. It's been very interesting. And I'm glad you brought your wife with you. I think that adds to the flavor of the presentation. And the fact that she was able to live a good share of that
Well,
with you is
we're
great.
very glad to be able to participate in this project, and we're trying to encourage other GIs to do the same.
Did you have some pictures you wanted to show us?
I just brought them on
Oh,
I just
okay,
burned the CD.
okay,
And I have a copy of my discharge paper if that's interesting to you,
okay,
and my honorable discharge, so
okay.
if that's helpful. They're not very good copies, but such that I have.
Appreciate it very much. Thank
You're
you.
very welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Judy.
Thanks.
One nice thing about being in Alaska was everybody else was away from their families, so we were family for each other.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah,
And also the school where I taught in Alaska, in Anchorage, it was a replacement because the other one, half of it had gone down in the '64 earthquake.
oh my.
And we had times we could not go out on the playground because the moose were on the playground. They are very big.
Yeah, you know, they have a thing called the Fur Rendezvous up there, and we saw two of those, and one of the ones we were going through, there's a band coming down the road, and it says, you know, my high school has a big drum like that, and it's one of those big, like 12 feet in diameter drums, big bass drum. And it got out there, and wouldn't you know, it was my high school.
wow.
It was Redford High Marching Band, was up there for the Fur Rendezvous in Alaska, 1968, I think it was. So we had a lot of surprises along the way and enjoyed that whole experience. Life's been good, overall. Didn't always do what we wanted at the moment, but life's been pretty good.
Yeah, the mission is there, you just need to follow it.
Well, like I said, I counted 16 ancestors and relatives that fought in various wars from the Revolutionary War. None were ever wounded or killed. And I had this great-grandfather who was in the Confederate Army, never wounded, never killed. He never fired his rifle that we know of. He guarded a salt lick, which was an important mineral resource for making gunpowder.